however hard you think you need to work to create a better world, double down, because the world's going to catch up to you. I tell students a lot of times that'll say, well, I'll get into government, but, first I got to go out and make some money to pay my bills. And I say, okay, I get it. Here's how it's going to work. Very often, some is very significant debt from student loans or whatever. And so you're okay, I'm going to go out and find a good first job, make some money. And then making a little money, so you're going to buy a nice car. And then maybe fall in love and get married, and you want to buy a house. But now all of a sudden I'm 55 or 60, and the kids are off to college and all that worked, and I'm living great. But now my spouse gets sick, or I get sick, and life intervened, and pretty soon I look and say, oh my God, that life intervened. And I tell them, okay, wait, don't do it. Most of you out here who tell me, and you come to me and say, you've inspired me, I'll do this. I want to leave my head in that pillow in the last day I breathe air on this earth, and so I left more. But I say you won't do it, because life's going to intervene, and pretty soon you're going to run out of time.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. My first international guest on the Dialog Liber podcast is Steve Jarding. Steve is a professor and political advisor. He was named Professor of the Year at the Harvard Kennedy School, and his course, Running for Office, was twice nominated as the most influential class in America. Today, we're discussing about what it takes to become the president, why so many young people steer clear of a political career, and whether liberal democracy is due for an update to fulfill its promise in the 21st century. I'm Theodor Cataniciu, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. Steve Jarding, welcome on the show. Great to have you here. How are you?
I'm great, Tutor. It's great to be here. I love Romania. I've been coming, 10, 11 years now, every year. And I'm back, and it feels like a second home. And I love Bucharest. My God, what a city.
I'm sorry you had to see the traffic today.
There was that. It was. I thought I was in New York City at rush hour. I mean, it was nasty.
Let me tell you, I lived in New York, and New York at rush hour is better than Bucharest today.
Well, it was today. Exactly. It was like, what's going on here? So.
Let's not talk about impossible problems like traffic in Bucharest. We're going to talk about easier things like power, like leadership, like elections.
Yes.
A very important year this year. Over half of the world's population is headed to the polls. And Romania is no exception. Mm-hmm. We're going to touch a bit on the threats and opportunities of this year, but the tradition here is we start with warm-up questions. These are binary questions. Nuance follows in the rest of the conversation. You ready?
Right, I'm ready.
Do you prefer House of Cards or Veep?
This is going to sound... Kevin Spacey is a tremendous actor. I know he's had his own personal issues, but I got to go with House of Cards. There was something... I mean, listen, Veep is fine, and I like it, but House of Cards was creepily close to a lot of stuff I've witnessed in politics. No near as dramatic as House
minus
of
the murders.
Yeah, exactly. It nowhere near that. But yeah, they did a lot well, and it was like, it's scary, but there's maybe more truth to it than we would have liked.
Money or power?
Well, I believe one emanates from the other. So I guess if I want power, I normally, not always, but normally need money. So I guess I have to start with money.
Fair enough. Meritocracy or equity?
Again, a great question. It's hard to argue with equity. I mean, right? It's just on its face. And yet, I guess I'd put it this way, I understand a meritocracy. I would just hope we can get there without it.
Pragmatism or idealism?
I'm an idealist, even in this day and age. I fear if we lose idealism, we lose part of our soul. So I would start with that. I know we have to be pragmatic, but if we're not idealistic, I think we're missing something.
Are you a generalist or a specialist?
Well, personally, I'm probably a specialist because I spent my entire career working in politics and campaign management and political communication. So it created a specialty. So for me personally, I guess I'd have to look at it that way. I'm fortunate that I've been able to stay in this business this long, to become a specialist. I don't say that arrogantly. I don't think I'm special.
I think if anyone can say it, after the decades you've been doing political strategy and communication, you're on the safe side of the territory.
Okay, well, I appreciate that.
Machiavelli or Sun Tzu?
Sun Tzu. The problem in this day and age is everybody wants to be Machiavelli, and that comes at a price. Donald Trump, Putin, Bolsonaro. You go right down the line, and you go, Machiavelli. I get it, but it's not that cool. But it can be misused. I understand the principle, but I think it's easily misused. So yeah, that would not be where I would go.
And finally, the last warm-up question, the question that no one has escaped so far this year: Donald Trump or Joe Biden?
Well, that's an easy one for me. I think Donald Trump is a sick person. I think he's all about power. I thought he was a horrible president. He was an embarrassment to the United States of America. He was an embarrassment to democracy. 2 days ago, he compared himself to the slain Russian opposition leader, which was one of the most unconscionable things. He supports Vladimir Putin, who put this guy to death, and now he's saying he's the guy being persecuted. So, for me, I apologize to Romania and the world for Donald Trump. America's way better than that individual. Having said that, Joe Biden's got his issues. I understand he's 81 years old. You watch him, he's slow to step. He and his administration do a horrible job at informing not just the American public, but the world of the things he's accomplished. He's actually been a pretty decent president, but nobody in America knows it. And that's on him. And that's on him and his team. So certainly of the two, it's not close for me, but that doesn't mean Biden doesn't have his own problems.
Yeah, it seems like age is it's the elephant in the room, so to say. It seems like the mainstream media is a bit downplaying the question, but if you go at grassroots, seems a lot of people have concerns.
They do. And what's interesting, though, is that Trump seems to get a buy on it, because Trump can screw up. And he'll say, well, I was just joking. I was just playing around. No, he called his wife by a different name the other day. I don't think that was intentional. Right? And in fairness to him, he's 78 years old or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I hope I have my faculties at 78 and 81. It's one of those things where at a time when we need kind of reform, we're looking for new ideas and new hope, that in a country that likes to claim it's the strongest, greatest representative democracy in human history, that we've gravitated to individuals who, at least on its literal face and figurative face, are old school. They're yesterday, at a time when the world's kind of looking for a new tomorrow. So it's weird. It happens, and it's just the nature of politics sometimes to get it. I don't think it was an accident. I don't think Americans were going, oh, there's young talent out there, but you step aside for the 280-year-olds. That didn't happen. It just happened. So, but I wish it were different. We need new leaders everywhere in the world, let's start with America. We need new leadership.
I couldn't agree more, and it seems like we're on the brink of it happening again. If you look at the prediction markets, right, at these platforms where a lot of different people, if you will, the wisdom of the crowds in action, they seem to think that Donald Trump has the first chance to win as of right now. So
yeah, I wouldn't go that far. He certainly can win, no question about it. So people that say, oh, he's a flawed person, he was not good, he's 91 indictments, there's no way. No, there's a way. It's going to be interesting to watch these indictments play out, because what you normally hear from people is to say, well, if he's indicted, or if he's in prison, can he be president? And the answer is yes, he can be president. And then so he could be in prison, get elected, and then pardon himself, although that's tricky constitutional territory. We've never gone down that path, so you're going to see a lot of tinkering with, okay, how does this work?
Even asking the questions in the first place is pretty
bizarre.
Yeah,
with one exception, if he's up on indictment charges on insurrection, inciting the January 6th riots. If he's convicted on those, that's an act of treason, and under American constitutional law, and he could not run for office or get elected to office again. He would be disqualified. So, but to your point, and use that all the time. The fact that we're even having the conversation is bizarre and kind of creepy. And it shows, I use the line a lot, and I love it because it was so true that when President Harry Truman invited Winston Churchill to Missouri, Truman's home state, and I think it was 52 or 53. And of course, Churchill was long out of power. Truman's out of power. But at a press conference, an American reporter, you know the story probably, famously said, well, Mr. Churchill, what do you think of the great American representative democracy? And, the arrogance of America. And Churchill paused for a moment and he said, I think it's the worst form of government ever devised. And the reporter, Mr. Prime Minister, what are you talking about? Look at America's democracy. We're taking off. We're leading the world. We're this great shining beacon in the hill. And Churchill said something to the effect, well, I'm not finished. It's the worst form of government ever devised, except for all the others that have tried and failed. And a lot of people looked at it and say, well, wow, that's a great line, kind of a cute turn. But I think it was a more serious line. What he was saying is, you arrogant, American fool. Democracy is not easy. You got to work at it constantly. It doesn't just happen. So, aren't you great? Start thinking you're great, and this thing's going to fall apart. Democracy is an imperfect vessel. But I think if you look at world history, Churchill was right. It is so imperfect, which we forget sometimes, right? And I think the arrogance of, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the West was so arrogant that democracy was so wonderful it would just take foothold everywhere. And the fact is, it doesn't, because it is a flawed vessel. America and the West should have had a Marshall Plan for democracy to say, here's how you set up a democracy. Remember, these countries in Eastern Europe and this part of the world had been under communism for 47, 50 years. There wasn't an adult in the room that had been an adult to see how a different government ran. And so all of a sudden, democracy will just take root. No, in democracy, you have to have an independent judicial system that can watchdog the government. You have to have a free and unfettered press that can be the fourth estate that gives honest information to the public. And as a consequence, not all of that developed everywhere in this part of the world. And because I get it a lot, and I don't mean this pejoratively, I'm so proud of what Romania and countries all over Eastern Europe have done. But I get sometimes people will say, well, Professor, democracy, it doesn't work. And I say, but you don't really have democracy. By the way, America doesn't necessarily have democracy. So I don't mean that as a slam. It's just democracy in its kind of purest form doesn't give you Donald Trump, right? It doesn't give you the populists that are running around saying, I'm for you, when they're really for them. For themselves. So, I believe. In fact, I'm so proud of what countries like Romania and Eastern Europe have done because it's so hard, and you did it without a blueprint.
It shows it's possible. It shows that a country without a legacy of democracy, we did not have a period in our history before communism to look back at and say, here's how democracy looks. No, the blueprint wasn't there, as you say. It should be a hopeful sign to other countries.
And that's what I think we're missing in this, because it's easy to concentrate on, everything's going to hell, instead of saying, no, there's actually there's a lot of good out there, that to the point, how did you guys do this without a blueprint, with all the pressures from money to politics to ideology to religion to you name it, and somehow you guys are doing it. You're not done yet. As I say, democracy is never done.
There were a lot of bruises, broken bones, but we stumbled forward.
Yes, and sometimes that's a tremendous victory. And I mean that genuinely. You look and you go, wow. I'm not – when I tell people, well, you don't really have it, what I mean by that is it's okay that you don't really have it, but don't throw it out. Don't say, well, it doesn't seem to be working, so it must not work. No. Give it time. Work at it. Democracy needs everybody's participation, because that's the definition of what it is.
And without question, this year is the major test for liberal democracies, as I've mentioned briefly. Over half of the world population in Romania has 5 different election cycles. We've never in our history have had so many elections in a single year. Now, very recently, they've put some together, so they happen on the same day. But still, we're going to go to the polls a lot more than usual. What are the threats you see in the United States, you see here in Europe, in regards to this massive movement to the polls? Where do you think the danger lies?
Disinformation is one. It is. The chairman of the United States Senate Intelligence Committee is a friend of mine, a guy named Mark Warner. I ran his gubernatorial campaign years ago, was when he first was elected to office. And as the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, obviously he gets very selective information that most people wouldn't get. And I did I was charged to do an assessment of the power of disinformation for the largest cybersecurity company in the world. This is 3 or 4 years ago now, and I, everybody was familiar with it, but until I started researching and seeing the depth of it, it scared the hell out of me. I mean, you look and you say, "Oh my God, this stuff is not only real; it is unbelievably dangerous." So I asked Senator Warner. I met with him, and we're friends, so it was kind of informal, but it was, "Hey, I just did this study, and you're the chair of the Intelligence Committee. Where, if anywhere, on the rank of threats to democracy in the world would you put disinformation?" I mean, because the easy ones are Russia, they're a threat to democracy. China, maybe, a different type of threat maybe than Russia, but a threat. Maybe it's Iran, maybe it's, whatever. And I said, is disinformation on the list? Is that a threat? He said, it's number one on the list. Yeah. And I said, more than Russia? I mean, what Putin's doing is crazy.
Have a lot of nukes.
Yeah, no, exactly. And he said, Steve, people everywhere in representative democracies are being fooled by this stuff, and it turns them off to vote, so they don't participate. They get into a bubble where they legitimately, or in their minds, legitimately look at disinformation as legitimate. And he said, about the time we think we figured it out, there's 1,000 new ones out there. And he said, it's undermining the whole concept that representative democracy works. And I think there's truth to that, and that's why you're seeing the rise of these populist movements around the world and the success. These guys, Bolsonaro ran in Brazil saying, one of the first things I'm going to do, I'm going to imprison journalists. And people were like, yeah, whatever. Really?
And we see the same in the United States today with Donald Trump hitting at mainstream media whenever he has the chance. Not to say that mainstream media is perfect. A lot of times we can find examples, counterexamples, and so forth. But I think we are, it's a story wars all the way down. We are in a major propaganda battle.
Yeah, no question about it. I started out. I was a journalism major in undergraduate at university. I was a journalist for a couple of years. Had an online newspaper. It was mostly American policy stuff, but had about 30,000 subscribers at its peak. Not a big deal, but it was not. It worked. I loved it. I learned a lot. But when you do it, and when you're in a business as you are, you sit there and go, we're missing this. I mean, we need this. And when only 9% of Americans think that mainstream media is believable, we got a problem. Jefferson famously talked about the absolute need for a free and unfettered press for democracy to exist, much less survive. And today, if anything, our press it's not so free, and it's certainly fettered, if you will. I mean, and that's. Think of it this way. You're way too young, but there was a newsman by the name of Walter Cronkite in the United States. He was an anchor of CBS Evening News for years. Yeah. For years, when you'd ask Americans, who's the most trusted man in America? Today, you might get a president, you might get a religious leader, you might get for years, it was Walter Cronkite. Think of that. In America today, people would laugh if you said, should we even put a journalist on a list?
Right.
What a change. I mean, I grew up, I was young then, believe it or not, but when Cronkite was on the air, but you'd listen, and he was reputable. And again, Cronkite is an example. Cronkite went to Vietnam as the anchor of the CBS Nightly News, and he reported from Vietnam that we were losing the war. And Lyndon Johnson, famously in one of the biographies, turned to his aides and he said, if we've lost Cronkite, we've lost America. In other words, if Walter Cronkite tells America, because they believe and trust him so much, that this war is going badly, I'm in trouble. Because they're going to believe him, they're not going to believe me.
The decline in trust has been steep, especially after the pandemic. We see a very sharp decline in terms of normal, if we are to call it, or traditional journalists, and an increase in alternative or independent journalism, as well as sort of the rise of the influencer sort of platform. You see Tucker Carlson making tens of millions of views on X.com, and so many others. How do you think this plays into the mind-making part of the election? Do you think now podcasters are the ones that sway public opinion more than CNN does?
Oh yeah, I don't think there's any question that we've moved there. Now it's different because it's more splintered. When it kind of used to be, there was the big three in America: ABC, CBS, NBC, and then CNN was added and Ted Turner, and so okay, maybe there's another. But it was always a small kind of a finite sample. The difference today is everything is so much more dispersed. Now, is that a good thing? I hope so. I think so. The complaint is, well, there's no filter on, so much of this. So, and that's the danger, is that I can pretty much say anything, on whatever platform, and there's no repercussion. And I think that emboldens those who wish to use these types of platforms instead of to inform and do the job that they should do, really, as someone who's informing individuals based on your own intellect and your experiences, and that they're using them for personal and political and ideological gain. That has to be figured out, because what we're finding, and I certainly found it in the research on disinformation, is that the problem isn't that people get their news from podcasts or these, again, kind of new platforms. The problem is we get into bubbles. And very often the bubbles are all one-sided, but we're in the bubble and someone's telling us this is what they're telling us, the vaccine doesn't work. You don't need it. Don't get it. And we believe them. Because why? They're members of the media. Well, that's not media at that point. They have crossed a line into propaganda. And that's the danger, is that the responsibility to be who you are is more difficult because you don't have the constraints that maybe the major networks had that said, you kind of got to tell the truth or as close to it as you can because there's going to be consequences if you don't. That is out the window today. Fox News can say whatever the hell they want. MSNBC, the critics say, the Republican critics or conservatives will say, well, they say whatever they want and it's all liberal. That's the danger, is there's not repercussions in news, podcasts included, that you are journalists. And if you don't take the responsibility that says, as a journalist, as I say, I went to journalism school. There was a code that said, your responsibility is you got to tell it like it is. You may not agree with it, but this isn't about your opinion. You're someone who has an unbelievably powerful responsibility to tell people what's going on. And today that's out the window too often. So come back to where I started with the question. I think you guys are unbelievably important, but we got to figure out how to somehow flag the ones that aren't really journalists, but they're propagandists, and say, you can't call yourself a journalist anymore. You're entitled to your opinion. I get that, but not in this platform. And somehow we have to figure out a way to elevate the truth sayers, because otherwise you get dragged down with the rest of them. And that's not fair. That's wrong.
I think the natural tendency that we have as humans is to be biased towards what we believe. So I'm not sure if the standard of objectivity is necessarily realistic, as in maybe the solution is, and I've seen this in the United States creatively implemented, there's websites like allsides.com, I believe, that put together the outlets that are considered leaning left, leaning right, or centrist. Mm-hmm. And so you can see the titles, you can see the articles side by side, and then you kind of average them out. That is like a creative solution to basically navigating this territory that is just confusing.
Right. No, it certainly is an attempt to do that, and I hope they have success. I really just think this is the Wild West anymore. It's a total new way to communicate news, to communicate what's going on in the world that is uncontrolled, unfettered, which makes it the Wild West. And if you understand the history of the Wild West, there were a lot of things that went wrong. A lot of people got killed because the Wild West that's the way they operated. So we've got to figure it out. The sad part is we got to figure it out at one of the most critical times in human history, when I give a speech around the world where I talk about, what are the threats to humanity? And the threats to humanity are worldwide today. For most of human history, they were local, they were geographical, might be religious, might be ideological, but you could deal with them at a local level. Global warming isn't local. Income inequality isn't local. Artificial intelligence and job displacement as a consequence, that's not local anymore. I mean, you look at the problems facing the world. I mean, hell, robotics. I mean, the the displacement of the human worker. I mean, in the United States, by 2035, half of the jobs in America will be automated. We don't need people to do them. What are we going to do when those people aren't working? So there's no tax base. They're not working. So what are they doing? It's a world we haven't envisioned, and we need journalists, we need people to and leaders to get on the page that says, we got to quit worrying about the immediate because it's the future that's going to kill us.
I mean, we might as well, it looks like we have reached some sort of limits of liberal democracy as it is currently imagined. For democracy to deliver on its promises, there seem to be some transformations or reforms in order at this point, be it universal basic income, be it taxing the robots. Where do you think the territory is exciting to discuss in terms of democracy? Is it intervening in the decision making? Should we all be like the Swiss, answering on our smartphones every day the decisions instead of having this representative model? How do you envision the next decades of liberal democracy progressing?
Well, I mean, they may not all be wrong. The Bill Gates saying we should tax robots, keep people kind of scoff at it. But his point was, you need money to operate, and if half of Americans in 10 years don't have had their job displaced by a robot or some sort of Autotron machine, we got to figure something out. So my sense is that well, first of all, we have to take care of the immediate. The immediate is we got to figure out how to get money out of politics and disinformation out of politics, because money and disinformation are destroying the capacity for liberal democracies to not just thrive, but even to survive. So I think it's like anything. I can say I want to move into the future. But I have a cancer. I better take care of the cancer first, or there won't be a future. We better take care of how the institutions are failing today and give them a roadmap for how to succeed, or the future we may not get there. It may not matter. I don't mean to be overly dramatic, but as someone who has studied government and politics, and I've written about it all my life, studied it, taught it, I've never seen liberal democracy in my lifetime as insecure as it is today. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is there are areas of hope, starting with young people, who I think young people today are the most educated, they're the most worldly, they're the most tolerant. They accept differences like my generation and most generations in human history did not. We tended to dwell on differences and not accept them. I mean, think of America today when Republicans and Donald Trump saying, "Oh, we got to close our borders." Mm. Oh my God, stop it, please. I've been all over the world, worked in 50 countries, trained people from literally almost every country on earth. America's diversity is what makes its its greatest quality, because diversity demands tolerance. And I've been to a lot of places where we're still fighting the wars of yesteryear. Your religion versus my religion, your ideology versus mine, your ethnicity versus mine. And I look and I say, oh my God, I can, and from that perspective, I can say, thank God America was the melting pot, because, for most of our, certainly modern history, we didn't look at, and I mean, some people did. I know it's not, race or, this person doesn't look, or this person came in. So there was some of it. But today, it's now become, again, a cancer on America. The melting pot is now being torn apart by people that say we don't like a melting pot. By the way, you wouldn't have been here if it wasn't for the melting pot. Your grandparents came in because it was a melting pot, and now you want to get rid of it when you benefited from it? I mean, the greed and the arrogance and the narrow-mindedness is mind-boggling.
It's a bit funny when you see the first generation sort of immigrants voting for Republican politicians, because in a way it makes them feel more American when they're saying, let's keep the others out.
Yeah. Well, there are polls. That's a great point. There are polls that say the people that want borders closed more than anybody are the people that came across those borders recently, and it's kind of that. And I get it. I'm not scapegoating them at all, but it goes to your point. They're like, okay, maybe we got in, but maybe it is time to close, because what's happening is the jobs that when they came to America, they've been here now a generation or so, they're moving up the ranks, and now people are still coming across saying, I'll do his or her job for half of what you're paying them. And so now they're feeling the threat that other Americans do. But I think the bigger issue is we have to understand immigration. And I tell people, and I retired from Harvard 3 years ago, but and about half my students were international. But I tell people, I don't think, and I say this with utmost respect, I think immigration is less about race than it is about money. Yeah. I think the businesses that want low-income, no-benefit workers in America don't give a damn what your skin color is. You could be blue or polka dot. They want low wages and no benefits. So I get, and that's why I say I'm not trying at all being disrespectful. I get that as an immigrant, someone with a different skin color or ethnicity, you're going to get picked on by small-minded people in America and around the world. So I understand what you're saying there. I'm just saying, let's be honest. These corporations that bring in cheaper labor, no benefits, they're by the way, they're the ones saying, well, we don't want immigrants. And so they wink and they nod and then they say, well, come in though and take my low-paying job with no benefits. So, in that sense, I mean, the world is changing dramatically, and maybe we have to go to something where a system where you vote, everybody gets
swipe left, swipe right.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the answer, but I'm okay to try. I mean, Franklin Roosevelt in the United States famously, he had the alphabet soup programs when, we're going to have the CCC, that was building, railroads and stuff. We had this group that was doing that. And he was asked one time, a reporter said, what happens if these alphabet programs don't work? And he smiled and said, I'll try new ones. And I think that's kind of what democracy is doing, right? It's like, okay, there's some fractures here. What should we do? We got to try stuff. So we're trying different journalism, blogs, different platforms. Maybe there's a different way of voting. Maybe I think we have to be open-minded to allow ourselves to compete with the enemy of humanity, which is ignorance. And a lot of these, groups that are using disinformation and playing off of emotion and playing off of ethnicity and racism, they're ignorant. They're doing it for selfish purposes. They're not ignorant in the sense that they know exactly what they're doing. They want to cause disunity and to fire people up and to turn them off so they can win. That's what they're doing. It's no secret. But liberal democracies have to figure out how to counter that. And we're going through a critical period. I really think, though, that when these world stage problems start hitting home, and they're certainly started. I mean, global warming's been around for a long, long time, but it's starting to manifest itself in ways where we're seeing the tornadoes and wildfires and all this stuff. That at some point there'll be a self-correction where people will have to focus on those issues because they're seeing. I mean, give you an example with global warming. The people talk about the 2-degree threshold. If we hit 2 degrees Celsius, that the world will be forever different. It won't be dead by any means, but it's going to be different. Again, we're seeing it now. We're about at 2%. Floods, wildfires. For every degree the temperature goes up in the world, crop yields drop by 10%. There's all kinds of statistical information that says we're on the path to a real problem here. But science also says the United Nations, I think it's called the Interglobal Program on global warming, says we're more likely to hit 4 degrees by the end of the century. A Yale study says it could be 8 degrees. The problem with that is science is pretty uniform that if the temperature rises 6 degrees, the oceans die. If the oceans die, sorry, humanity, you're dead too. The point is, when I started giving this speech talking about what's going on in the world, the state of the world, this was 8-9 years ago. Science was pretty much of the opinion we might hit 2 degrees by the end of the century. It's 2024 and we're virtually there. So that's how quickly this is happening. That's my point, is that at some point maybe, people will just say, we don't have a choice but to deal with this stuff. We've got to put the petty stuff aside because I want my kids and grandkids and great-grandkids to have a relatively sane place to live. I want them to be able to feed them. And we're seeing, 20 million people last year in Africa died from global warming. If that were Europe or the United States, we'd be talking about
like Romania.
That's the size of Romania.
Yeah, no, exactly. If that happened, the people would go, what the hell's going on? It's Africa. They don't get a lot of attention, and we let it slide. But at some point, we're going to see that, because at that, not only will oceans die at 6 degrees, at 4 degrees, there are scientific studies that say the oceans will rise 260 feet. Well, 80% of the human population lives within 80 miles of a coastline. You raise the oceans that high and you cover the infrastructure that's on those coasts, we can't reconstruct that. There's no government in the world that could afford to replace the roads, the sewer systems, the physical buildings. And when that starts to encroach, and it is, the city of Miami in the United States, their water supply system is threatened because water's rising and they can't purify the water for the community.
There's a very good book. It's called The Water Will Come. It's about the coastline in Miami particularly. There's a whole chapter about how it is likely that the prime real estate, costing a lot of money today, won't be there in a matter of decades. And, I would say immigration is one of the ways you feel this and you see this immediately, because the disruption that climate change is causing is forcing these people to look for a better life and better opportunities. To bring this to an end, to bring this first part of conversation to an end, I think there is no doubt America's success is in large part thanks to its ability to integrate so many people from so many parts of the world. I think the critics, like I've seen Elon Musk on X recently say that I think it's a problem when, if left unmanaged, if you have more people entering your country than people being born in that country, at some point, that creates social tensions, that creates, ruptures that will have, that may bring, extremists to power. So there has to be, the U.S. Luckily is a very large country. There is a lot of space there for a lot more people and for a lot more cities. But probably the process has to be managed in a better way than just like open borders.
Right.
I think that's where.
No, I think that's right. But the problem is as you suggested, these folks aren't necessarily coming to America from places that are idealistic, places where everybody they're fleeing something. Could be political oppression, could be global warming. They can't feed themselves. They don't have water. Well, right now there are about 70 million refugees in the world. I was on a panel in Greece. Climate change panel. This is 4 or 5 years ago now. The panel was all these experts, scientists from all over the world, and the topic of refugees came up. What are we going to, when the waters rise, we're going to have more refugees, what are we going to do with them? The topic came and said, well, what are we looking at? What are the numbers? And back then it was like 60 million refugees. And the estimate was by 2050, if global warming continues unabated, there could be 1.2 billion refugees. Now, there's only 8 billion people on planet Earth. And you went, nah, no way. Everybody agreed. No, there weren't half the panel went, nah, it's really 300 million. It was like, no, it's about the number. And when you think about it, there's 267 million people in Indonesia, 167 million in Bangladesh. Island countries that are underwater, that's almost 500 million right there. You start losing that, those people are going somewhere. So, to Elon Musk's point, I don't disagree that that's a problem, but just don't confuse that with find a solution because they're coming. They got to go somewhere. And so you can't just say close the borders. They don't give a damn. They're trying to feed their kids. Human nature is I got to go somewhere. My home's underwater. I don't want my kids to die. And so, again, I don't think he's wrong, but humanity as a whole, government as a whole, and it starts with government, by the way, they've got to start finding solutions to global warming or they're going to be overrun all their borders. Right. It won't just be America. It'll be all of Europe. It'll be any place with money where people think, they've at least seemed to have opportunity. I want to go give the best opportunity to my kids. That's just human nature. And so in that sense, I'm not angry at immigrants at all. I get it. If I were in their shoes, I'd do the same damn thing. The answer isn't to blame the immigrant. It's to blame the problem that's causing the immigrant to want to leave their homeland. I get students all the time that say, I'm from name the country, and it's a poverty country. Bangladesh. I have a student in Bangladesh. I want to go home. Why do you want to go to Bangladesh? I've been there. The slums are awful. The quality of life isn't good. It's gotten better there under Sheikh Hasina. I get that. But, why do you want to go? Because it's my home. That's what, so this idea that, they're just fleeing and, they don't, no, they're fleeing for a reason. If they had their wherewithal, their right, they would say, I want to stay home by my grandparents. I want to stay home where I grew up and play in the fields where I played. My friends are there, and that's where we want to be. That's who we are as human beings. We gravitate to those things that were most comfortable to us as we, through our formative years. So if they're leaving, there's a reason. Let's find the reason and get rid of that, and you'll solve the immigration problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you see that in Romania today, as the country has, done tremendous economic progress over the past 2 decades. You see a lot more Romanians who have initially, moved to Spain, to Italy, to the UK, coming back home, starting businesses, investing here. There is the pull to home. It's it's a part of human nature. Absolutely.
And again, you can't underline that. If people are leaving, they're leaving for a reason. Don't blame them. Find out the reason they're leaving. And a big one is global warming. If we could somehow solve that, Africa, this was in probably 2017, effectively ran out of land. That is, and you go, well, you can't run out of land. Well, yes, you can. If land is so void of minerals, so void of nutrients, so hardened by global warming and drought that you can't do anything with it, you've run out of it. So let's figure out how to change that and let people have the wherewithal to stay where they want to be in the first place, and we'll solve a lot of problems.
I think here's the danger of the America first thinking and also Europe first thinking. Wherever you bring it, it's you cannot just isolate yourself from global issues.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. They will still come to your doorstep. They will jump over your doorstep. They will burn down your doorstep.
That's right.
Unless you act today and you act decisively.
That's absolutely correct. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that it used to be we could. Oh, there's an ideological issue, a religious issue, an ethnic issue. We can deal with it locally. Not today. Our problems are global. And we have to, as a world society, we got to figure that out because we're still fighting the wars of past centuries. And it doesn't mean ethnic wars don't matter. Or that ideological wars. I get it. But they're not the greatest threats to humanity right now. And we need to shift our paradigm of thinking for how to solve problems to a much more global scale. God help us. There's a great line in when it comes to global warming, and it's a baseball analogy that Mother Nature bats last, and you always want to be the last one at the plate because then you create the opportunity to win. And Mother Nature bats last, so we better figure it out because Mother Nature will live whether we do or not. It'll be some iteration that we may not recognize, but Mother Nature will live. We'll be the ones that die.
Now, the challenge of leadership is clearly immense in this century. Let's focus on this for a moment because you've had, dozens of generations of young leaders, many of whom you've taught at Harvard, and you've encouraged, I know from listening to your presentations, workshops, and so forth over the years, you've encouraged many people to go into politics, to have a political career. Is politics the best way to change the world?
It's the only way to change the world right now. Think of it this way. The government of Romania is the largest business in Romania. The government of the United States, the government in every country on earth is the largest business in the country. It's also the most powerful. Governments tax, they spend, they dictate social and monetary policy. They can imprison you. They control the courts. There's no entity that has that power. And so, listen, I would love to say philanthropists can do it. Bill Gates, and I was on the Gates Foundation board for a couple of years, and so God love what he and Melinda were setting up trying to do. But Bill Gates will say, I immunized 20 million Africans, and it just, my foundation, I feel so good about it. I said, well, I'm glad you did, but 20 million died last year from global warming. So they might have been immunized and they weren't going to catch a disease, but global warming was going to catch them. So we have to start thinking differently. And government is the only entity. We may not like it, but until you find somebody that has the power and the capacity that government has to solve our problems, I got to go with government. And that's been the problem is the best and the brightest young people, it's too easy to say we're cynical toward government, we're not participating in government. Oh, they're all crooks, all these lines, so I'll go into something else. Okay, that's fine, but when the best and the brightest leave the one entity that has the capacity to affect change more than any other, and they leave that to somebody else, it creates a void, and someone's going to fill the void, and very often it's not people that give a damn about solving the world's problems. It's people that care about themselves or maybe their industry or I look at the United States Congress and with as much respect as I can muster, there's a whole lot of people there that it scares you to death. You look and you say, how the hell did you ever get here? Some of the things they say, go ahead and quote the Constitution, but read it first, for God's sake. Study it a little bit. I mean that generally. It's scary, but they get there because somebody that was understood the power of representative democracy and liberal democracies. Somebody who understood the importance of that politics is about those who would be served, not those who serve. These guys don't understand that, because that's not why they did it. But they were able to do it because a lot of good people said, I'm not going to go through the hassle. I believe every human being has a responsibility to give something to humanity, to do something to create a better world. I tell my students all the time, and I tell when I give speeches, that our goal should be, if all 8 billion people on planet Earth said, my simple mantra is, on the day I die, the last day that I put my head in that pillow, I better be able to look back and say the world's a better place because I walked upon it. If everybody thought that way, we wouldn't have any problems. But we don't think that way. In fact, hardly anybody seems to be thinking that way. But it's simple. Just let's create a better. My mission in this life is to say the world better be better. So then that means I can't just concentrate, am I making money? Am I taking care of myself? Is it all about me? I have a responsibility to humanity, the greater humanity. And we have to start thinking that way. But we're not, and that's a problem.
When young people think about politics, and I may include myself in this category despite the lack of hair,
I can relate to that.
They think, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Anyone who's capable of becoming the president should not be allowed to do the job. You hear all these things. Romania has some specific
I couldn't disagree more.
Is that correct in your experience? Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
The question is, how do you draw? Because personally, I think it's a huge, at least in Romania, the pay is shit. Sorry to say that.
Mm-hmm.
The people swear at you on every platform imaginable for problems you've created or not. It seems to me like the personal cost is immense.
It is.
And you might get there and get stuck in endless bureaucracy and back dealing and not achieve very much. At least that's how I look at this thing, and that's why I do a podcast, and I'm in business and not in politics. What would you say to a young person who basically thinks this way?
I'd say quit thinking that way. You're wrong. Don't think that way. That's. Okay. Seriously. Okay, fine. Let's stay with that thought. You're right. It all sucks. It's all shit. All right. How do you feel? We're going to walk away. We've established in our mind that the world is shit and government sucks, and I'm okay with that. So I just walk away. If it sucks, let's go fix it. It is the most powerful entity ever devised by human hands. Again, think of the power. Not only can they take your money, spend them, they can throw you in jail. They can imprison you. They can take your liberties and freedoms away. Government. And by the way, we need government. We don't need a history lesson from Aristotle to know that rule of law is pretty damn important. And when we didn't have it in human history, we had chaos. So you have to have some entity that brings rule of law to the table, and that's government. I don't understand when people say, government is awful. And I say, really? Did you drive to work today? What'd you drive on a road? Well, who built that road? Government did. Did your kid go to a school today? Well, who built that school? And did you get sick and go to the hospital? Who funded the pharmaceutical industry and the medical industry with their research money? Government did that. So what's the alternative? Fine. You want government gone? You want industry to say, I'm going to fund it and not take it all in profits? Good luck with that. I don't fault. I get business. Their shareholders say, you got to make us some cash. Okay, I'm just saying let's balance it a little better. 50% of corporations in America, 50% paid no taxes last year. And I say, come on, pay your fair share. I do. My brother made pretty good money and actually very good money. And when I was young, my older brother, he'd say, well, you just wait till you start paying, taxes I got to pay. And I looked at him because he said, well, you're a Democrat and, you just wait, you'll change when you, and I looked at him, I said, John, someday I hope I can pay as much tax as you do because it'll mean I'm making a lot of money and I'm going to be fine. We have a responsibility, and corporations do. And in America, particularly, at least, they're not exercising that responsibility, and it's wrong. Greed is, of the 7 deadly sins. They're all bad, but I keep coming back to thinking, God, greed is just a nasty one. So, no, I'm an optimist at heart. Sometimes I look and say, well, what are you nuts? But I think you have to be. I believe in the power of the human mind, the human spirit. I just think we have to empower, particularly our young people, to say that it matters and you have a responsibility. You don't get to live in this planet if you have the wherewithal, and so many people don't. I mean, I've been to villages in Bangladesh and in Indonesia where people line up for hours at the one well in town to get a couple buckets of water, and that's how they spend their day. They can't probably change the world because they just haven't been given the opportunity to. And the sad part is all that wasted, intelligence, humanity, because they're just trying to feed themselves. They're trying to get clean water. That's a waste, and we've got to take care of it. But I think if we did do that, the power of the human mind, the human spirit, if we unleash it, it can do anything. Every 12 hours, all the knowledge that we currently possess will be doubled. So it's 6:30 at night, 12 hours from now, 6:30 in the morning. Every piece of information we have, we now have twice as much. The challenge is going to be who's going to go get it. I mean, if you told me, is there a solution to global warming? Apparently not, because we've been trying to deal with it. Stop. Of course there's a solution. There's probably multiple ones. We got to have the wherewithal to go find them. And I use the example of COVID. When COVID hit, literally the scientific community was, well, this could last for years, maybe generations, and kill millions and millions and tens of millions of people, because that's what pandemics do. And we just don't know how to get to vaccines very quickly. In 11 months, we had 6 that were virtually identical in helping to solve the issue of COVID. That was not only unprecedented, it was enlightening, and it gives you hope, because these companies were empowered to say, go find a vaccine as quickly as you can, or we're going to lose tens of millions of people. And they did. And why did they? Because the knowledge was there. They had a reason to go get it. We need to say the knowledge is there to solve global warming. Go get it. If it were up to me, I'd put a bounty on it. I'd say, world community, let's take 0.5% of GDP in every country, or whatever it is, some number, let the smart guys figure that out. Put it into a pool, and we'll have a board that determines, but if you're the one that figures out how to pull that carbon down, turn it into something good, and we stop global warming.
You make it big.
You'll make it big. You'll get a big chunk of this pot, if not all of it. I think we'd solve it tomorrow. I mean, I think the knowledge is there. I think we could do the same with diseases. I think we could do the same with a lot of our problems. But there's a difference between capacity to solve the problem and the will to solve the problem. And we've got to cross that line.
Mm-hmm. Strong incentives all around, but I think two ideas that I pull out from this is, well, to start with, it's like you say, no one gets out alive of this thing, and so you might as well try to do the right thing to leave the world a little bit better than you found it.
Right.
Someone I respect a lot, I've heard him say that he doesn't want to die. He doesn't want to die rich. When he dies, he doesn't want people to say he died rich. He wants people to say he died helping. Mm-hmm. I thought that was an important idea, and I think the second thought I had was, the cost of not being involved in politics is having to accept idiots governing you.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, why are you complaining about politics? Well, they're all idiots. Well, then replace them. Who are
because
you?
If you end up being an idiot yourself, then you don't change it. I mean, you haven't changed it for the worse. It's like you still maintain the status quo.
Exactly. But you got to try. And we just have too few people. That's, we talk about, are we, disenfranchising voters, and we do all over the world. But we really disenfranchise candidates as well. Because we convince them that it sucks, we don't pay well enough, they're all corrupt. It costs millions of dollars, for instance, in the United States to run for office. And people go, I just can't do it. We disenfranchise candidates at least as much, and probably a lot more, than we do voters. Neither one's good. But the idea that it's just a voter that gets disenfranchised, it's, in America, if I'm a school teacher making $50,000 a year, I can't raise $10 million or $20 million or $30 million to run for a Senate.
I mean, heck, even for like city council is probably like a...
Exactly. And so, so I don't do it. Well, there's something wrong with that.
Absolutely. I think, you if you poll mothers around the world, the number one job that they most dislike, that they don't want their kids to do, is politician.
It absolutely is. Has been for years.
So I think there's space for some opinion changes over there. But I want to zoom in this. So, like, what's the difference in your view between a boss and a leader? Like, what are the abilities, the qualities of the people that hopefully you want to give so much power and responsibility towards? What's different between them?
Well, another good question. I think bosses are the individuals that say, I'm here to make the trains run on time. Leaders are here to say, I'm going to think into the future for how we can create a system where we're going to move forward as human beings, and then I'll let the boss make the trains run on time. Bosses, I don't think, are necessarily visionary by design. They're players who, like I say, they're efficiency wardens. But leaders are visionary, and bosses, we don't. And again, it's not a critique on a boss. It's just not their job.
Because I think you have, like, probably your job is one of the most exciting out there. I've had a chance to interview. You're a political strategist, a consultant. You work face-to-face, one-on-one with these leaders, head of states, senators, and so forth, helping them craft their message. How important is charisma, the ability to tell powerful stories in political success? How do you see this play a part?
Charisma, I was working in a campaign in Spain a few years ago, and the campaign team came to me and they thought their candidate was boring. And they said, Professor, can you make our candidate more charismatic? And I said, no, I can't. There's things we could do to try to humanize him, to make him connect better. But you are who you are, and I never would tell someone to change who they are because it'll come off as phony, and it's who wants to act like you're somebody you're not. But there are ways. I mean, charisma to me is an attitude. It's not a gift. It's not, oh, Steve's the most charismatic guy in the world. No, it's an attitude. I can be charismatic if I believe in what I believe, but I can't fake it. I can't act like I believe in something I don't. So if in order to be, and so the question, how important is it? It's important, not so much, again, that I'm charismatic, it's that I'm passionate, that I believe in something and I'm fighting for that. That, to me, is a stronger definition of charisma, because a lot of times people think of charisma as it's just this engaging woman and she's just unbelievable. Yeah, but where did that unbelievability come from? It should come from the heart. We talk a lot when we put together a message, and message is, to me, the most important part of politics. It's very often understated. Well, people, we have this great organization, we have all this money. Yeah, but if your message isn't any good, none of that will matter. And I use the example of Hillary Clinton. When she ran, her team would say, oh, we've got the best field operation in American history. We've got millions of people in the ground. And, they're going to knock on your door 5 times on election day, and they're going to call you 6 times. And I'd say, but she's going to lose. I mean, she people don't like her. And, oh, well, no, people don't like her. They think she feels entitled, and, she just wasn't connecting. She didn't have a very good message. And I had one person say, yeah, but the field operation is going to turn the vote. And I said, if I don't like Hillary Clinton and you call me 50 times a day and you knock on my door 100 times, I'm still not going out to vote for her. So message matters, and a charismatic message matters if the charisma, in my opinion at least, is based on, are you showing people you give a damn based on your passion for wanting to affect change. So I think it's extremely important. In fact, to me, it's critical. I mean, part of my communication training is that people don't connect with intellectualism. For years we thought they did, that if I just give a speech and it sounds smart and I sound like I know what I'm doing, people will love it. And when we studied that at Harvard and around the world, when I was kind of trying to create this paradigm of communication, we found out that not only didn't people respect it, a lot of times it turned them off. They'd say, well, Steve thinks he's so much smarter than I am. It's almost like using an intellectual argument made me more arrogant, not more likable. And so we started designing this kind of new paradigm of communication, saying it's passion that matters. Passion connects. So how do we bring passion into our messaging? And that's what I think you're talking about with being charismatic. Because again, we talk in politics a lot. To talk to people from your heart, not from your head, because that's where they connect. And there's starting to be a lot more empirical evidence that that's absolutely accurate.
That's the book of the edition. It's a great time to mention it. We have here Drew Westen's book, The Political Brain, written in 2007, before the 2008 Obama victory.
Right.
I think the book was dedicated towards the Democrats, saying, guys, if you don't sort of apply the advice in this book, which is, passion and emotion overtake reason when it comes to putting the stamp on the right name.
Yes.
At least in Romania, we use stamps. I don't know if it applies to the United States, but I think that's an important message to drive home for a lot of people. You assume you convince people through facts, through very clear presentations, but a lot of times it's how you make people feel.
That's right.
That decides where that stamp is going on.
Yeah, no, it really does, and I'm biased. I plead guilty because Drew's a friend of mine. It's still the best book on politics I've ever written, even though it's 2007. I think is indicated the year it came out. I think he's got a second edition coming. I don't know. I talked to him. It's been a year or so, and he was working on it. So I don't know if it's out yet. If it is or when it is, it'll be very good. Drew is one of the most visionary, I think, political minds, communication minds, certainly that I've ever met. I've read his book was always assigned to my classes and my communication classes, and so I read it every semester before just to kind of refresh my own. Every time I read it, I find something new, and I'm like, how did I miss this the first 8 times I read it or whatever? It's that good. I mean, any book that every time you read it, you learn something new, probably is chock full of great ideas. But no, he's absolutely right. I mean, and it makes sense. In human communication, I mean, you and I are having a casual conversation. That's what most people do, right? 99% of human communication is, hey, what's going on? Well, did you like the movie last night? Oh, the meal was great today. It's very animated, very friendly, very warm. And yet when politicians give speeches or interviews or business leaders give presentations, it's all real stiff and serious. And they speak fast because they get nervous and they just want to get it done. And it completely falls apart. And Weston understood that. That you've got to the average human being, when they give a speech, uses one emotion. And people go, oh, no, it's got to be more than that. Not if I'm reading it. And most people read their speeches. And they read their speech in 12-point font, which means about 12 words per line. We know from the studies that I did on human communication that the human ear can only take about 5 words at a time, and it needs a break. And so if I'm speaking at 12 words at a time before I take a break, and then I take that break, and then I speak 12 more words, and then I speak 12, the listener all of a sudden goes, I can't keep up, and they check out. So you've got to slow it down. But in slowing it down, it allows you to work emotion and passion that trigger hand gestures, face gestures, changes in your voice, your tone. And that's what connects, because when you and I talk on a regular basis, I don't sit here and, hey, how you doing today? What'd you do last night? And it gets real flat. If I did that, you'd say, Jarding's weird. I'm not gonna hang out with him anymore. And that's why we don't do that. We learn from, as babies. When, mom and dad, oh, look at you, oh. And, so animation matters, emotion matters. We learn that imprint from literally the day we're born, and that, mom and dad don't go, oh, what a cute little baby, oh, you're...
Right.
Yeah, or we'd be robotic.
Right.
So we learn, and that imprint is there, and that's how we communicate, except in most places when we give a speech, an interview, or a presentation. So...
I must say I absolutely loved I've taken your media training course a couple of times, and just as you described with Drew, I pick up new things every time I have the chance, and we have the chance in a few hours when you start your workshop again this year. But for the people who don't have the chance to see you live, which I highly recommend, the book is the second best recommendations we have for half of the world population, who maybe like for the people running for office, but also for the people trying to decide who to vote for. Mm-hmm. I think it's great from both perspectives. And if I may, another book recommendation I loved is The Dictator's Handbook. Maybe you've picked it up as well. Mm-hmm. A very good book talking about political incentives in politics and how basically you can understand a lot about what a politician would do by answering a simple question: what would keep him in office a bit longer? It's not a perfect model, but it's a model that's as accurate as we have today. Steve, there's going to be a lot of people mad if we don't wrap up the conversation soon, because you're going to be late for your future engagement. So wrap-up questions. The questions are short. You decide how long or short the answer is.
Okay.
All right? Here we go.
I'll do my best.
When you hear the word success, what person comes to mind?
Franklin Roosevelt. Think of the history. Abraham Lincoln would be right there too. These are two individuals that took power at a time of, and of course these are biased American examples, but they're close because I lived there and studied. But Franklin Roosevelt comes. We got the Second World War, the Great Depression, the looked like democracy was just going to hell very, very quickly. You had fascist rising and Hitler in Europe, and it just in looking like, wow, that's the wave of the future. And he laughed at the danger of it. People would say, well, the Republicans are, attacking you, and he'd laugh, say they're the do nothing, they're this awful, they don't understand leadership. And he persevered. And say the same with Lincoln, the Civil War, the whole slavery dilemma that was tearing America apart. And famously, when Lincoln got elected, he complained to friends that he feared there were no great issues to solve, and if there weren't great issues, he could never be a great president. Careful what you wish for, Mr. President. They come immediately to mind because they were not supposed to succeed at the most difficult times, certainly in American history. There's, Gandhi would come to mind. There are people, King, Nelson Mandela, people that were visionary come to mind. But people that were visionary and they weren't intimidated by the difficulty of it.
Yes, speaking to this, just a small comment is, a lot of times we tend to look inside when we ask questions like, what's my purpose? What should I be doing? Whereas a lot of times maybe it's better to just look outside and sort of be a man of your time, answer the great questions, the great challenges of your time, and, maybe your purpose is out there rather than...
I think too often that human nature is we somehow think we're supposed to concentrate on us, on well, how do I make sure I'm successful, and if I'm successful, that will help everybody. Well, to some extent, that there's truth to that. If I'm successful, hopefully my kids have opportunities, things like that. But too often, that's not going to move the needle, right? We have to look beyond ourselves. As I said when we started today, I think we have a responsibility to humanity, and we should be teaching and training our kids at a young age of the importance of giving back, the importance of creating a better human society. But we don't, and we miss a tremendous amount. I think if we did that, there would be fewer people in poverty. There would be fewer people that didn't have education or opportunity. We would look and say, it's just wrong that a kid goes to bed hungry, or it's wrong that your parents or grandparents have to choose between should I take my medicines or eat today because I can't afford both. Those are just things in the human condition that should be unacceptable. And if we looked at humanity differently, I think they would be unacceptable. But we tend to be very parochial, and it's a missed opportunity. We're better human beings when we think that the world is bigger than we are. And we have to, and our kids have to understand that and have to be taught that.
In 100 years, people will look back to our world today. What do you think they'll be disappointed, or what would they hope that we would be doing differently? So when I say our world, I mostly mean the liberal, Western free world.
A missed opportunity. You guys were, men and women were our last kind of beacon of hope in a world. And I'm assuming a lot of these world problems may manifest to something that we don't want. And 100 years from now, God help us if there's 100 years from now. And I mean that genuinely. If we don't solve some of these problems, good luck. I don't want to think what the world's going to look like in 100 years. So my guess is if there is humanity 100 years from now, they're going to say, I'm living in a world that it's really tough and it didn't have to be. I'm barely surviving, or I've seen pain, unimaginable pain that should have never happened. And I'm going to look back and say, what were you doing? Why didn't you do this?
What common piece of advice do you hear frequently that you think is wrong?
Government doesn't matter. It sucks. They're crooks. No, they are what you make them. And if you believe that, then you're contributing to the problem. In liberal democracies, people have a responsibility to participate, and if they don't, blame yourselves. Don't blame government. It's the government you created because you chose not to participate. In America today, America loves to say they're the greatest representative of democracy. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But I look and tell my Democratic friends, okay, if I told you a country called itself representative or liberal democracy, and only 1 out of 2 eligible voters registered to vote, and of those who voted, only 1 out of 2 voted regularly. So 3 out of 4 adults in the society that claims to be a liberal democracy, only 1 out of 4 participate. Would you call it a liberal democracy? And they say, well, not really, because in democracy by definition says that there's participation by the masses. And I'd say, well, welcome to America in the 21st century, because that's what's going on. And it's not just America. I mean, you're seeing people turned off all over the world in liberal democracies and not participating or buying into the skepticism and cynicism. And I say, well, then that's on you guys. I mean, if it goes back to the point you made earlier. If you don't like it and you don't participate, well, then to hell with you. You're the one to blame. Don't blame them. I mean, it's a democracy. It's not a fascist system. You can't say, well, I'm leaving it up to them in a democracy. The definition is you got to participate. And if you don't, then that's on you.
You have 2 options. You can accept defeat right now, or you can do your best to change things. And even at the end, despite your best efforts, things have failed. At least you're not sitting around the defeatists.
Yeah,
the
well,
cynics.
at least I can put my head in a pillow and say, I think the world's a better place because I tried.
I've done my best.
Maybe I didn't succeed at everything, but I tried. And that's so important. And yet most people are checking out and they're not even trying.
If you could send a text message to yourself at 22 with obviously what you know today, what message would you send yourself besides by Apple?
Yeah. However hard you think you need to work to create a better world, double down. Double down. Because the world's going to catch up to you. I tell students a lot of times they'll say, well, I'll get into government. You've inspired me through your courses or through your speeches. So I'm going to do it. But, first I got to go out and make some money to pay my bills. And I say, okay, I get it. And I don't begrudge you for wanting to make money. But and I tell them, here's how it's going to work. You've got some debt from, very often some is very significant debt from student loans or whatever. And so you're okay, I'm going to go out and find a good first job, make some money. And then making a little money, so you're going to buy a nice car. And then maybe fall in love and get married, and you want to buy a house. And then maybe you have a child or 2, and I need a bigger house. But my income's bigger, and I'm doing fine. I'm working my way up the company. And pretty soon you're not 30 anymore, you're 45. But it's going good. And, I got a summer home now, and I've got college funds for the kids. It's pretty cool. But now all of a sudden I'm 55 or 60 and the kids are off to college and all that worked and, I'm living great. But, now my spouse gets sick or I get sick and life intervened and now I got to get well and pretty soon maybe I get well, maybe I don't. But now I'm 65 or 70 and pretty soon I look and say, oh my God, that, life intervened. That's the problem. And I tell them, okay, wait, don't do it. But just beware. And I say, most of you out here who tell me, and you do, you come to me and say, you've inspired me. I'll do this. I want to leave my head in that pillow in the last day I breathe air on this earth. And so I left more. But I say, you won't do it because life's going to intervene and pretty soon you're going to run out of time.
What topic have you changed your mind about recently and why?
Mortality. I was misdiagnosed a year ago. I had a cardiologist tell me that I was dying, that I was an AFib candidate with my heart such that I could die literally at any moment, as people in AFib can do. You have a heart attack or stroke. So he put me on a couple different medications, one of which slowed my heart down significantly, constantly. So the pill constantly released chemical to slow my heart down. And so I thought, oh, my heart, I didn't know I was this sick. And but I would sleep 10, 11 hours a night and wake up exhausted. And I'd think, by God, he's right. I just slept 11 hours. I woke up, I have no energy. My heart is clearly given out. Well, this went on for 6, 7, 8 months or so. And finally, a friend of mine, I was telling him, and he said, you got to go to Mayo Clinic. And Mayo Clinic's arguably the best clinic in America. It's in Minnesota, and I live in South Dakota, which is very close to it anyway. And And he said, no, get your ass to Mayo Clinic. Just get a second opinion. He said, I'm not saying the first one's bad, but just go to what we acknowledge is, if not the best, one of the best clinics in the country. And I had been there before anyway. I had a cardiologist there. And so I go, and I see a cardiologist for an hour. He's gone for an hour, comes back. He and 3 other cardiologists went over my record. They did all the tests, and he and this other cardiologist come in. So, and they looked at me, and the older one, who was kind of the dean of the cardiology department, said, we've been talking a lot about you. And I said, well, I hope it's good. He said, well, I think it is. But the good news is you were misdiagnosed. You are not an AFib. You do not have a bad heart. The good news is we're going to get you off these medications he put you on to slow your heart down. Because he said the bad news would have been if you stayed on the medication he put you on, you'd be dead in 6 months.
Oh, God.
Because every time you get up to walk across the room, your heart says, I got to pump more blood to bring oxygen to the brain. That drug that you're on won't let it. So it slows. It says, no, I got to slow you down, And he said, you're lucky you checked this, because if you'd have stayed on this regimen, you'd be dead. It changed the way I looked, where now, and I'm an old man at 65. I joke somewhat. I've never felt better. I lost 50 pounds because I could start working out again, and because I couldn't when I was on the pills, because I
Right.
walk across the room, I'd want to
Right.
pass out. So I start looking at mortality different, saying, you get one shot at life, and by God, I'm going to maximize it. And so, I went from, and I'm doing a lot of international work. So I was in South Korea a week or so, more than that, 2 weeks ago, and then came to London, went to Georgia for 5 days doing some work there. I'm here now. I'm going from here, it looks like, to Mongolia, and probably on Saturday, and I'll be there for several days. And I'm going from there, it looks like, to Croatia for a client. I'm like a kid in a candy store. I mean, it's like I get to do this and work with people. I mean, I'm here in Romania working with, wonderful people. I'm biased. I work with Sebastian Berger here, and he's like a son to me. He was a student. He and Holly met in one of my classes.
Wow.
They used to sit in the front row. He is, I believe since I met him, and I told people, one of my fellow professors that knew who Sebastian was, I don't know if he took his course, but I said, watch that kid. He's going to change the world. He'll change Romania, and I think he'll be an example for the world. He's not alone, but there are other students I look and I say, wow, that's just that individual is, thank God he or she is here, because they're the type of people we need to change the world. So to me, those are gifts. And, I've always believed that we shouldn't look at our life. We make the mistake of counting our life based on years, right? It's okay, I'm another year older. Okay, well, that means I'm 65. We ought to base it on the really good people we've met and have been blessed to touch. And under that definition, I'm way older than 65. I'm probably 800,065. I've been blessed to meet some of the best, brightest, most honorable, honest, decent human beings in the world, just because of the profession I'm in. And those are absolute gifts. So, like I say, I feel like I've been given a new lease on life, even though I never should have been given the old one that said I was dying, because it was a mistake. But in the moment, you think it is, because that's what it was. So I look at life a little differently all of a sudden. I feel like I'm been reborn as a kid, and so I got to make the most of it.
Right. Wow. And I mean, I might say you are in a real sense sort of a leader of leaders, or like teacher of leaders, if you will. And so, I mean, that's a powerful legacy, and I'm sure it will continue being built for many years to come. What book would you advise or recommend or gift to every high school graduate in Romania and the United States? Let's connect the two worlds, because we have many things in common, as I like to call Romania as Little America. So,
that's an honor to America. I assure you. Thank you for that. What book? There's so many. I love to read. I've always loved to read. I'll give a weird one. Okay, not weird because it's a weird book. It's a fabulous book. There was a guy in the United States who was considered a science fiction writer by the name of Ray Bradbury. Fahrenheit 451, I think, was his most famous book. But he wrote a book called Dandelion Wine. And Dandelion Wine was a book about innocence and about values. And it's a short little read, but I read it periodically because it gives me hope. It gives me hope that there's inspiration in innocence. Like I say, I would recommend it just because, and I would tell students, read this book and never forget its lesson. Just understand what Bradbury was trying to do with this. Never forget its lesson. If you never lose your innocence, you're probably going to make good decisions. We lose our innocence, we get jaded, we get cynical. And that's when I think we start making bad decisions. So it's probably an unlikely book that nobody's ever heard of, but it's fabulous.
Wonderful. And the last question for you, Steve. We give you for free for a week a huge billboard here in Bucharest. You can put any message, any image, quote to the people of Romania. What message do you leave them with?
The best is yet to come.
The best is yet to come.
For Romania, and I mean this, like I say, I've been coming here for 11 years or so. The people are fabulous. You've overcome so much in your history. You never lost hope. You have tremendous potential here to be a leader, not just amongst the people of Romania. I think you have opportunities to be an example for the world. It's going to take a ton of work. I don't say that because it's Romania. It takes a ton of work, and America takes a ton of work anywhere. But I am so impressed with the heart and mind and the soul of the Romanian people that the best is yet to come. You got to fight for it. Don't give in to cynicism. Don't give in to those that want to tear it apart. But if you believe in the best is yet to come and you fight for that, there's nothing that Romania can't do.
On this note, Steve Jarding, thank you for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you.
Yay! We made it. Steve, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. It's been a great conversation.